There are moments in history when the universe holds its breath, when stars dim their light just slightly, as if afraid to witness what comes next. This was one of those moments. High Sovereign Zelthara stood on the bridge of the eternal dominance, watching the blue marble of Earth spin slowly in the distance. She had conquered 17 civilizations in her lifetime. Each one had begged, negotiated, or fought with predictable desperation. And each one had fallen. Her long fingers traced the edge of her command throne, feeling the engravings that told the story of her victories. Soon she would add another. Behind her, War Marshal Krivax checked the tactical displays. 2,000 warships hung in formation beyond the moon, each one capable of turning a continent to glass. He had designed this fleet himself, pouring decades of military genius into every vessel. No species had ever withstood such force. None ever would. Below them, on Earth, a woman named Dr. Sienna Blake stared at her computer screen. The numbers made no sense. 3 days ago, every telescope on the planet had detected them. Ships. Thousands of ships. The world governments had tried to keep it quiet, but secrets that large have a way of bleeding through. Now everyone knew. Humanity had visitors, and they had not come in peace. Sienna worked in a basement laboratory in Geneva, part of the Global Defense Initiative that had been little more than a fantasy project until this week. She had spent her career studying theoretical physics, writing papers that few people read and fewer understood. She never imagined her work would matter. Not like this. Not with the entire species counting on ideas that existed only in equations and desperate hopes. Her partner in the lab, a quiet engineer named Thomas Rourke, hadn't spoken in 3 hours. He just kept building, his hands moving with mechanical precision as he assembled components that had never been tested. They were building something impossible. They had no choice. Surrender was not an option the human race seemed capable of considering. Across the city, in the emergency council chambers, President Elena Morrison sat with the leaders of every nation. The room smelled of coffee and fear. They had been debating for days. Some wanted to negotiate. Others wanted to fight with everything they had. A few had simply stopped talking, their faces hollow with the realization that nothing they decided might matter at all. General Hassan Park stood at the tactical map, pointing to positions where their 47 combat vessels had been deployed. They looked pitiful, scattered like toys across the solar system. He had been a soldier for 30 years, had fought in 3 wars, and never once felt the cold certainty of defeat before battle had even begun. But he felt it now. It sat in his stomach like a stone. Zelthara activated the communication array. A message would reach every device on Earth simultaneously. She had given this speech 17 times before, and the words came easily. Her voice carried the weight of empires, the certainty of inevitability. People of Earth, she began, and on the planet below, billions stopped what they were doing. You stand at a crossroads. The hegemony of United Stars extends to you an opportunity. Join us. Become part of something greater than your small world. Contribute your resources and your labor to the collective prosperity of all civilized species. Refuse, and you will be removed. You have 36 hours to decide. The transmission ended. Zelthara settled back in her throne, expecting the usual response. Panic, chaos, eventually, reluctant acceptance. But on Earth, something different was happening. Sienna looked up from her computer screen. Thomas stopped working. They stared at each other across the laboratory. Did she just give us 36 hours? Thomas asked. His voice sounded strange, like he was talking in a dream. Sienna nodded slowly. Then she smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of someone who had just been handed an impossible deadline and decided to treat it as a challenge. We can work with 36 hours, she said. In the council chambers, President Morrison stood. The fear in the room had not disappeared, but it had transformed into something else, something harder. She looked at each leader in turn, saw the same thing reflected in their eyes. Humanity had been knocked down before. Plagues, wars, catastrophes that should have ended everything. But somehow, stubbornly, impossibly, humans always got back up. "We don't kneel," Morrison said quietly. "We never have. We never will." General Park felt something shift in his chest. The stone of defeat cracked. Beneath it, he found something he thought he had lost. Hope. Not the foolish hope of easy victory, but the fierce hope of people who refuse to go quietly into darkness. High above, Zelthara checked the chronometer. 35 hours and 58 minutes remained. She had already begun planning the victory celebration. She did not know that in a basement in Geneva, 2 scientists were about to break the laws of physics. She did not know that humanity's 47 ships were moving into positions that made no tactical sense, executing a strategy that looked like suicide. She did not know that she had made the fatal mistake every conqueror makes. She had assumed that power was simply a matter of numbers and technology. She had forgotten that sometimes the most dangerous weapon is having absolutely nothing left to lose. The universe held its breath. The countdown had begun. The command center, buried deep beneath the Swiss Alps, was a relic of a forgotten fear. Built during the Cold War, it was designed to withstand a nuclear apocalypse that never arrived. Now, decades later, it housed a gamble far more desperate than any Cold War strategy. This was the final, desperate roll of the dice for the entire human race. For 29 hours, Sienna Blake had not slept. Her eyes burned with fatigue, yet her mind was a razor's edge, sharper and clearer than ever before. Across her screens, equations flowed like a river of light, beautiful, elegant, and utterly terrifying. They described something that defied reality, something that shattered every principle of energy conservation she had ever been taught. But the math held true. That was both the miracle and the curse. The mathematics worked flawlessly. Beside her, Thomas stared at his own console, his face pale. "We're pulling energy from somewhere," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the servers. "It has to come from somewhere. Energy doesn't just appear out of thin air." Sienna's gaze remained fixed on the cascading numbers. "It comes from everywhere," she replied, her tone a strange mix of awe and dread. "From the quantum foam itself. We're not creating energy, Thomas. We're borrowing it. All of it, every tiny, random fluctuation in every single point of space for a light year in every direction around Earth." Thomas slowly turned to face her, the implication dawning on him. "And when we give it back?" he asked, his voice cracking. Sienna didn't answer. She didn't have to. They both knew the catastrophic consequence. When that much borrowed energy was returned to the fabric of space-time all at once, the space around Earth would ripple and tear like a pond struck by a meteor. Every ship within that lethal radius, enemy and friendly alike, would be ripped apart at the molecular level. Anyone who stayed too close to home would be annihilated. "How many people can we evacuate in 34 hours? Thomas asked quietly. Sienna finally looked away from her screen. "Not enough," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of their decision. "Never enough." Millions of miles away, in orbit around Mars, Captain Derek Yates of the starship Defiant Dawn read his new orders. He read them a second time, and then a third, convinced there was a mistake. His vessel was one of humanity's newest destroyers, fast, powerful, armed with experimental weapons, and crewed by 217 souls who trusted him with their lives. Now, command was ordering him to commit what looked like tactical suicide. His first officer, Lieutenant Amara Santos, stood beside him on the bridge, her expression grim. She'd seen the orders, too. "Sir, if we position ourselves there," she said, pointing at the tactical display, "we'll be in the direct line of fire of at least 40 enemy vessels. We'll last maybe 3 minutes, 2 minutes and 40 seconds, Yates corrected her, his voice flat. I ran the calculations. He looked out across his bridge at the faces of his crew. They were so young. Some were barely out of the academy. They had all signed up to defend Earth. But this wasn't defense. This was a calculated sacrifice, dressed up in official language. This order is voluntary, he announced, his voice echoing in the sudden silence of the bridge. Anyone who wants to transfer to an evacuation transport can do so. No questions asked. No judgment. The bridge was completely still. Then, Lieutenant Santos broke the silence. With all due respect, sir, she said, her voice firm and unwavering. Shut up and give us our positions. Something inside Yates's chest seemed to fracture. It might have been pride. It might have been grief. In moments like this, he realized they were probably the same thing. Across the solar system, a strange and terrible ballet began. 47 human ships moved into a new formation. To the tactical officers aboard the Hegemony flagship, it looked like utter chaos. The human vessels had abandoned any recognizable defensive posture. They were spreading out, creating massive gaps in their lines, positioning themselves in locations that offered no strategic advantage whatsoever. Some were accelerating directly toward the Hegemony fleet at speeds that would burn all their fuel in a single pointless charge. Others were hanging back near Earth, seemingly doing nothing at all. They're panicking, the alien officer Krivax observed with satisfaction. Their command structure has completely collapsed. But the fleet's commander, Zelthara, felt a flicker of something else. Not concern, not yet. It was more like ... curiosity. She had witnessed the panic of a dozen conquered species. This didn't look right. Panicked species fled wildly or clustered together for a false sense of security. They didn't spread themselves out with what looked like mathematical precision into positions that seemed random, but clearly weren't. Scan those vessels, she commanded, her voice sharp. Full spectrum analysis. I want to know exactly what they're carrying. Back on Earth, the heart-wrenching evacuation was underway. There weren't enough ships. There wasn't enough time. The cold, brutal mathematics of logistics had forced the implementation of lottery systems. Families were being torn apart by the whims of a random number generator. President Morrison had refused a seat on any evacuation ship, as had most of the emergency council. General Park had seen his family to safety and quietly returned to his post and deleted his own name from the manifest. In the Geneva Command Center, Sienna Blake initiated the sequence. The device at the heart of their plan was smaller than she expected, barely the size of a refrigerator. It looked like it had been cobbled together from spare parts and a desperate prayer, which, in a way, it had. As it powered on, the lights in the facility dimmed. Then, the lights across the European grid flickered and died. Then Asia's. Then the power grids of every continent on the planet were drained, one by one. Charging at 17%, Thomas reported, his hands shaking as he monitored the readouts. Energy draw is exponential. We're going to black out the entire planet in about 4 minutes. Let it draw, Sienna commanded. We need everything. High above, one by one, satellites began to fail as their power was siphoned away. Global communication networks sputtered and went silent. Cities fell into darkness, continent by continent, until the whole world was plunged into an unprecedented night. In that profound darkness, people looked up. They saw the enemy fleet, no longer just a threat on a news screen, but a swarm of malevolent points of light hanging in their sky. They saw their own ships, tiny and fragile, moving into position for a battle they could not possibly win. And in that shared darkness, something strange and beautiful happened. The panic stopped. The running and the crying ceased. People stood together in the streets, on their rooftops, and in open fields. They held each other close, their faces turned to the heavens, and they waited. Because if this was to be the end, they would face it standing, with eyes wide open, together. Aboard the Defiant Dawn, Captain Yates watched the enemy fleet begin its final, inexorable approach. They moved with perfect, terrifying precision. A wall of death sliding silently through the void. He opened a channel to his entire crew. "It has been an honor," he said simply. And around the solar system, on the bridges of 46 other ships, captains were saying almost the exact same words. Aboard the Hegemony flagship, Sci-Fi received the scan results. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, the first genuine sign of emotion Krivax had seen from her in months. "These readings make no sense," she said, her voice laced with confusion. "Their ships are running on minimal power. Some are completely dark. What are they doing?" "Perhaps they've surrendered," Krivax suggested. Powered down as a sign of submission. But Sci-Fi knew better. She had overseen the conquest of 17 civilizations. She understood the posture of surrender, the psychology of defeat. This wasn't it. This was something else entirely. Something she had never encountered before. The humans were positioning their ships like pieces on a game board, and for the first time, she couldn't see the game they were playing. "All ships to combat readiness," she ordered, a new sharp edge to her voice. "Begin the assault." In Geneva, the device reached its full charge. Sienna's screen flashed 100%, then climbed to 110, and to numbers that screamed past the boundaries of what should have been possible. The very air around the machine began to shimmer and distort. Reality itself seemed to bend and warp around the impossible concentration of energy. 30 seconds until they're in weapons range," Thomas said, his voice a strained whisper. Sienna's finger hovered over the single activation button. The moment she pressed it, there was no going back. The borrowed energy would be unleashed in a single silent cataclysm, and the universe would instantly demand its payment in full. She thought of all the people still on the darkened planet below. She thought of the brave crews of those 47 lonely ships. She thought of the terrible, terrible price of survival. 20 seconds, Thomas said quietly. High above the silent earth, Zelfara, Supreme Commander of the Hegemony Fleet, gave the final order to fire. The first shot never came. Captain Yates watched his tactical display and saw something impossible. The Hegemony ships had locked their weapons, targeting solutions confirmed, firing sequences initiated, but the energy never left their cannons. Instead, it simply vanished, pulled away by an invisible hand that reached across space and took everything that wasn't nailed down. In Geneva, Sienna pressed the button. The device hummed. It was a small sound, almost gentle, like a tuning fork struck in an empty cathedral. But what it represented was anything but gentle. In that moment, every quantum fluctuation within a light year of Earth aligned. Every borrowed fragment of energy, every tiny vibration in the fabric of space itself, came rushing toward a single point. The Hegemony fleet felt it first, not as an attack, but as an absence. Their reactors stuttered. Their shields flickered. Power drained from every system simultaneously, flowing out of their ships like water from a broken dam. Emergency lighting activated across 2,000 vessels. Crews scrambled to understand what was happening. On the bridge of the Eternal Dominance, the Hegemony flagship, Empress Zelthara gripped her throne as the lights dimmed. "Report," she commanded, but her voice carried an edge now. Something she rarely felt. Uncertainty. All ships reporting catastrophic power drain. Her second-in-command Krivax said, his legendary calm finally cracking. "Reactors are at 15% and falling. Weapons offline. Shields at minimal. We're dead in space." Zelthara stared at the blue planet below. In all her conquests, in all her centuries of warfare, she had never felt powerless. She felt it now. The humans had done something she didn't understand, something that turned her fleet of warships into hollow shells, drifting through darkness. But the true miracle was happening on Earth's side. The energy that had been pulled from the Hegemony ships, from space itself, from the quantum foundation of reality, it all flowed into the 47 human vessels. Captain Yates watched in awe as his power readings climbed beyond maximum. His reactor, designed to output a certain amount, was suddenly producing 10 times that, 100 times. Numbers that shouldn't exist. "Sir, our weapon systems are overloading," his tactical officer, Santos, reported, her voice a mix of shock and disbelief. "We have more power than we can use." "Then I suggest we find a use for it," Yates said. His voice was steady now. The fear that had gripped him moments ago had burned away, replaced by something pure and clear. Purpose. The 47 ships lit up like new stars. Their weapons, primitive by hegemony standards, suddenly had power reserves that made them terrifying. Their shields, laughable moments ago, became walls of force that could withstand almost anything. And their engines, their beautiful, inefficient human engines, roared to life with enough thrust to crack planets. Back in the control bunker in Geneva, Thomas watched the readings. "It's working," he whispered, a prayer answered. "It's actually working." But then his eyes darted to another number, one climbing relentlessly in the corner of his screen. It was labeled debt. The universe was keeping track of everything they borrowed, and soon, very soon, it would demand payment. "Sienna," he said quietly, "we have maybe 4 minutes before the energy returns to equilibrium. When it does, everything in this space will tear apart." "I know," Sienna said. She was crying now, silent tears running down her face. 4 minutes for them to finish this. 4 minutes for the evacuation ships to get clear. 4 minutes for us to prove we were worth saving. Aboard his ship, Captain Yates opened a channel to all human vessels. His voice rang out, clear and strong. "This is it," he said. "Everything we are, everything we've ever been, comes down to the next few minutes. Our planet is counting on us. Our species is counting on us. So let's show them what humans do when we're pushed to the edge." We push back. The 47 ships moved as one. They had been positioned with perfect precision, a deadly constellation waiting to be ignited. Now that precision paid off. Each vessel targeted multiple hegemony ships, their overcharged weapons cutting through the weakened shields like paper. Explosions bloomed across the enemy fleet, bright flowers of destruction that lit up the dark. Empress Zelthara watched her armada die. Ships that had conquered worlds, that had never known defeat, were being torn apart by a species that had been spacefaring for only 3 centuries. It should have been impossible. It was impossible. Yet it was happening. "Retreat," she said. The word tasted like poison. "All ships, emergency jump. Get us out of here." But jumping required power, and power was the one thing her ships didn't have. The hegemony fleet was trapped, helpless, waiting for death to arrive on beams of stolen energy. On Earth, people watched the sky light up. They saw their ships, glowing like angry gods, tearing through an enemy that had seemed invincible. They saw hope made manifest. Parents held their children tight, strangers embraced in the streets. In the darkness of their powerless cities, humanity found a new light. On the balcony of the emergency council chamber, President Morrison stood watching the battle unfold. General Park stood beside her. "We're winning," he said, and his voice carried a sense of wonder, of disbelief. "Against everything, against all logic, we're actually winning." "We're surviving," Morrison corrected gently. "That's what we do. That's what we've always done." In Geneva, the countdown reached 1 minute. Sienna looked at Thomas. They had spent 5 years working together, building impossible things, dreaming of stars. They would never see those stars now. They would never see tomorrow. But they had given humanity a chance, and that was enough. That had to be enough. "Thank you," she said, her voice soft. "For believing in crazy ideas." Thomas managed a smile. "Thank you for having them." Captain Yates destroyed his 7th enemy ship. His vessel was overheating, systems screaming warnings, but he kept firing. Around him, the other 46 ships did the same. They knew the clock was running. They knew what came next. But until that moment arrived, they would fight with everything they had. The evacuation ships, packed beyond capacity with refugees, cleared Earth's orbit. They watched the battle from a distance, saw the sacrifice being made for them. Mothers told their children to remember this day, to remember what people did when everything was at stake. Remember that humanity never surrendered. Never. 30 seconds remained. The hegemony fleet was broken, more than half destroyed, the rest damaged beyond repair. They hung in space like wounded animals, waiting for the end. Zelthara finally understood. The humans hadn't just built a weapon. They had built a funeral pyre, and they were willing to burn on it if it meant taking their enemies with them. She had underestimated them. She had thought power was measured in ships and technology. She had forgotten that the most dangerous creatures in the universe are the ones with nothing left to lose and everything to protect. 10 seconds. Sienna closed her eyes. Thomas held her hand. On the ships, crews braced for what came next. On Earth, people looked up at the sky one last time. The universe prepared to collect its debt. 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. The energy returned. And space itself screamed,